You ever stood in the aftermath of loss and wondered how faith survives when everything familiar has been torn away? Hello, friends, and welcome to Scripture for the Journey, the Bible in a Year. Today I'll be reviewing the books of Lamentations and Ezekiel. These two books emerge from the same historical wound, the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of God's people. Yet they respond to that devastation in very different ways. Lamentations gives voice to grief. Ezekiel offers vision. And together they teach us that faith must sometimes weep before it can imagine renewal. Lamentations is a book of poetry shaped by sorrow. Traditionally associated with Jeremiah, it doesn't explain suffering or rush resolution. Instead, it names pain honestly and without apology. The city lies in ruins. The temple is destroyed. The people are scattered. Lamentations refuses to minimize this loss. It teaches us that grief deserves language and that faith does not require pretending everything is fine. The poems of Lamentations move through anger, shock, shame, and despair. They acknowledge both human responsibility and overwhelming sorrow. Yet in the middle of this grief, a quiet declaration rises. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. God's mercies are new every morning. This hope doesn't erase pain. It exists alongside it. And Lamentations reminds us that hope can be whispered even when grief still shouts. Lamentations also models faithful lament. It brings suffering directly to God rather than turning away. The book teaches us that prayer can be raw, unfinished, and unresolved. And God isn't offended by honest grief. In fact, lament becomes an act of trust that God still hears, even when answers don't come. Where lamentation sits in the ashes, Ezekiel speaks from exile. Ezekiel is a priest turned prophet living among displaced people in Babylon. His book is filled with dramatic visions, symbolic actions, and vivid imagery. At first glance, Ezekiel can feel strange or unsettling. But beneath the imagery lies a clear message. God's presence is not confined to a temple or a city. God goes with the people into exile. Ezekiel's early visions emphasize God's holiness and sovereignty. The glory of God appears in unexpected places, reminding the people that exile has not removed God's authority or concern. Ezekiel confronts the reasons for exile honesty, naming injustice, idolatry, and broken leadership. And like Jeremiah, Ezekiel insists that faith must address the heart and not just the outward practice. Yet Ezekiel is also a prophet of bold hope. One of the most powerful images in Scripture comes from Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. In a landscape of death and despair, God asks whether these bones can live. And as God speaks, breath enters, bones rise, and life is restored. This vision proclaims that God specializes in revival where hope seems impossible. Ezekiel also speaks of a new heart and a new spirit. God's promises not only to restore the people physically, but to transform them internally. Hearts of stone will become hearts of flesh. Faith will no longer depend solely on external structures, but on renewed relationship. Ezekiel assures the people that restoration is not just about return, but about transformation. And together, Lamentations and Ezekiel teach us that grief and hope belong in the same spiritual journey. Lamentations gives us permission to mourn what has been lost, And Ezekiel invites us to imagine what God can still do. One of them names pain, the other one dares to dream of renewal. And for us today, these books speak to seasons of deep loss, whether personal, communal, or global. They remind us that faith doesn't skip over grief to get to hope. It walks through sorrow with honesty and waits for God's breath to move again. Lamentations assures us that God welcomes our tears. Ezekiel assures us that God is not finished creating new life. And together they form a powerful testimony. Even in exile, even in ruins, God is present, grieving with us and calling life back into being. So as you reflect on Lamentations and Ezekiel, consider this question. Are you being invited to grieve honestly? And where might God be stirring new life you can't see yet? Scripture assures us that both lament and hope have a place in faithful living. Next week we'll turn to Daniel, where faithfulness is tested under pressure and trust in God takes shape through courage and conviction. But for now, Lamentations and Ezekiel invite us to hold on to this truth. God meets us in grief, and God's Spirit can breathe life even into the driest places. Friends, if this journey through Scripture is meaningful to you, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who might appreciate it, and leave me a comment letting me know what image or phrase from these two books stayed with you today. And be sure to follow or subscribe so you can walk through all 66 books of the Bible with us this year, one week at a time. God bless you, my friends, today and always.